Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music production, and the music business. My guest today is producer, songwriter, and musician Mike Elizondo. First of all, we all know that streaming is changing music, but it's changing it in more ways than one. And a recent study by Harvard Business School, has shown that the long tail is actually finally coming to pass. Now, what is the long tail? Well, what the long tail is a version of the 80-20 rule. And if you'll remember, the 80-20 rule basically goes like this. 80% of your sales are coming from 20% of your customers, or 80% of your streams are coming from 20% of your fans. 80% of anything that you're getting is coming from 20% of the people that you're dealing with. So we all know that, and that's pretty much been the way it's worked since the beginning of business. Now, of course, the other way it goes is 80% of your sales, your streams, your views are coming from 20% of your product. Now, what the long tail basically does is kind of turn that around and say, okay, now your big hits or your most popular songs are certainly getting the majority of the views and the plays and maybe even sales, but the fact of the matter is that there's more and more of those views and sales coming from that 80%, coming from the long tail, coming from all of the least popular of your products. So, in other words, if you have 5 albums out, there's one that's probably selling more than all the others. But the fact of the matter is, thanks to streaming, now that's kind of equaled out. On an album, for instance, there may be 10 songs, but there's one in particular that gets all the views and listens and the plays. But thanks to streaming, once again, that's kind of evened out, and it's not as imbalanced. It doesn't follow the 80-20 rule like it used to. So there's a couple of things about the long tail. The first thing is you have to make everything available. And what that means is all songs are fair game. You put them out, all videos. It doesn't matter how produced or unproduced they are, because you'll find that sometimes the least produced are actually the ones that get the most action. So you have to make everything available. The second thing is, if you're going to sell something for the long tail product, you cut the price in half and then you lower it. Now, of course, that's less and less a factor today, but that was one of the 3 factors that you had to think about. And the third one, of course, is you have to make it easy to find, which in our streaming world today, that's not a problem. If you want to find something, you can. The only problem is you got to know about it, but if you want to find something, it's fairly easy. So that's streaming music and how it's affecting the long tail. Now, there's actually another component to this. And this study actually looked at a lot of albums over the last 30 years and found out a number of interesting things. The first thing is there's now fewer sales and there's fewer listens to whatever's in the top 100. It used to be, of course, if you were in the top 100 of albums, for instance, that's what was selling the most, and your catalog wasn't. Well, that's kind of turned around now. The other thing is that I find very interesting is the average number of tracks on an album is now 14. Now, I think about the days of vinyl records. What you'd find is somewhere between 8 and 10, which is obviously a lot more manageable for the artist than 14 tracks of today. That being said, the trend is, and it's something that I've been advocating for a long time, and you've probably read it in my books, that the day of the album is kind of over, in that what's the purpose of having one? There are so many more benefits to you as an artist if you just release singles, because in the day of streaming, albums don't mean as much. And in fact, we've just seen this happen with the Chainsmokers. They didn't release an album. Instead, they released 10 singles. And what that means is there's 10 separate events that you can actually promote, instead of one with the album and then a couple singles. So this makes a lot more sense in this day and age. So streaming is changing music in a lot of ways. Some of it's more subtle than others, but there are a couple of things right there that maybe you weren't aware of. If you have any questions or comments, send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. Don't forget to check out my new music producer formula course, as well as my other online video courses at BobbyOwsinskiCourses.com. For more on my music industry and music production blogs, just go to BobbyOwsinski.com to find links where you can also read excerpts from my books. Now, here's something interesting. Where does our musical taste come from? Again, this is another study that I found very interesting, and I thought I'd bring it up here. Well, what science has found is that our most vivid memories come between the ages of 15 and 25. So all the experiences that happened to us between the ages of 15 and 25, we remember better than anything else, any other time in our life. And that includes music. So, of course, what ends up happening is the music that we like between the ages of 15 and 25, we tend to like for the rest of our lives. Now, just think about yourself. If you're past 25, and if you're way past 25, what music do you like? Well, I bet it's from that era. It's not as simple as that, though, because there's something else involved, something called the exposure effect. And what it means is before the age of 15, our parents were playing the music that they loved. They were playing albums, they were playing singles, and they're probably playing it over and over and over. That exposure really meant a lot to us, and it's something that really drilled down in our brains. The more we hear something, the more we like it, it turns out. And if we heard a lot of music before we're 15, and it's our parents' music, we tend to also like that or even love music like it later on in our lives. So when it comes down to it, our musical taste is a combination of what was popular when we were young and when our parents were young as well, which is pretty mind-blowing. It's that combination that makes up what we really love in our lives when it comes to music. Mike Elizondo is a musician, songwriter, and producer whose work with artists is diverse as Dr. Dre, Eminem, and 50 Cent, to Keith Urban, Maroon 5, and Carrie Underwood, to Avenged Sevenfold and Mastodon. He was nominated for Producer of the Year in 2008 and has a ton of huge singles and albums to his credit. I spoke with Mike from his studio in North Hollywood. I'd like to know how you get started in this crazy business because everybody kind of has a different jumping off point.
Yeah, man. I mean, I was born and raised in the San Fernando Valley in Pacoima, a little suburb of the valley, and just kind of started on my journey when I was about, 9 or 10, really playing music. And I had a dad who was a musician and watched him, put together jam sessions at the house. And that kind of sparked the interest. And then I kind of found some friends by the time I was 14, 15, played in bands with them. Found my way to Hamilton High School, which at the time I was, I was basically started to play the electric bass and got to meet a lot of great musicians like Abel Borel Jr. and a lot of amazing people who would go on to impact my life in one way or another. And, it just sort of became a string of events after high school, playing in various bands and, meeting different record producers and different musicians. It just sort of, it sort of started from there. I mean, I also, for a period of time was primarily getting most of my work as a studio musician playing bass on people's records. And then, I guess a big shift came when one of my friends from high school at Hamilton introduced me to Dr. Dre, and that kind of set me on my course, pretty much the course I've been on for the last, 20 years, I guess now.
Was that your big break, you think?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I was able to make a living prior to meeting Dre, playing gigs and doing different things. But as far as, getting to do the work I'm doing as a producer and a songwriter, as well as still, playing as a musician, I mean, Dre was the real big break in terms of just, being able to be around a producer who was making records on a high level and being able to not only be a part of them, but learn and watch and observe, kind of, basically get to be the fly on the wall, but who gets to participate as well. So it was a pretty incredible opportunity.
It was pretty different from the music that you were doing prior to that, though, right?
Yeah. I mean, definitely a good point. I mean, I had grown up listening to all styles of music. My dad had, had a great record collection and turned me on to a lot of cool stuff, and some just by self-discovery as well, and whatnot. And prior to meeting Dre, I was playing in a lot of anything. I mean, I was playing in, some pretty heavy rock bands. I was also doing a lot of jazz playing. Briefly was playing with Peter Erskine even at one point. And
Wow.
I didn't know. I didn't really have a game plan. I just knew that I loved to play and I loved to create. And by the time I didn't really grow up listening to much rap music at all, to be honest with you. I had younger brothers who were huge hip hop and rap fans and sort of vicariously would know about certain things. And there were certain bands I was aware of, but I think, me as a musician, I was being more, drawn to Miles Davis and John Coltrane and, the Beatles and all kinds of different things, even a lot of classical music. And, but I think that ended up being what attracted Dre to me. It was the fact that I kind of didn't have that hip hop background, and I kind of brought a different sensibility to what he was already doing in the studio, and kind of worked out, and it being a fun collaboration. And Dre's just a fan of music as well, and a fan of musicianship, and I think that's where our common ground came.
What was like a typical day working with him? Was there a typical day?
Yeah, I mean, it evolved. In the early days, I was hired to come in as a bass player to replay bass lines, either from classic records or somebody had played a bass line on a synth bass that Dre wanted it on wanted a live or electric bass feel. And so I would just kind of come in and play bass lines for whatever he was working on. And then as it evolved, I kind of started coming up with those bass lines on my own, and then eventually, taking on more of a writer role. And once we kind of got, to that point where I'm writing more, I'd show up at the studio probably around 2 p.m., 3 p.m. And if some days were just writing days where we would go in, it would be maybe Dre and myself and maybe another, musician like Scott Storch or Mark Batson. And we would just basically set up at these little, sequencing stations. So I had my bass and my guitar and a keyboard rig, or, eventually, once Sawsynths and things like that came into play, I started bringing those to the session. And we had, Dre liked to program on an MPC 3000. So we all had MPCs, and they were all kind of linked up, with MIDI, and we would just kind of create. It was almost sort of like having a jam session using all these different instruments. But, once we were doing something that Dre liked, we would kind of put a skeleton, as he would call it, a little skeleton version of that idea, and then we'd move on to something else. So if it was a writing day, on a good day, we maybe came up with maybe 10 things that he liked, that he approved of, and 20 things got left on the cutting room floor. But, and then there were times where we were working with a specific artist where maybe one of those ideas that we had written either that same day or maybe from a prior writing day would get turned into a full production. And that's where, things would kind of evolve more just geared to one song and kind of finishing up the arrangement and production of whatever song and artist we were working with.
The production with Dre, was it faster, slower than some of the artists you work with later? I know you work with a lot of artists in a more traditional sense than, based around electronic tracks and MPC. So was it faster, slower working that way? How did it work?
Yeah, I mean, I really, up until that point, I mean, aside from a few sessions playing bass, on some records, I mean, this was really where I learned. So I can't really compare it. I mean, prior to that, I'd say it was just efficient. There were some songs that took a while, maybe 2 or 3 days to finish, and other songs got finished in a day. And if once we got to the production side of things, some songs came together very quickly, and other songs took a few tries at getting it right. But one thing's for sure, I mean, Dre would not allow anything to be released unless it passed his quality, his taste, his quality control, which I think is, the biggest part and the biggest reason for his success is to just put something out there unless, he truly thought it was great. And it's something that I learned a lot, or try to emulate and tried to learn from. But yeah, nothing. It would definitely, I wouldn't put it in the sort of Mutt Lange, territory of like spending months on a song. But it just depended on the song and what needed to be done, and some things came together pretty quickly. But he definitely didn't like just sort of sitting around in the studio waiting for things to happen, so there definitely was a certain threshold that he had, that, if things weren't moving, he changed, we'd put up another song, or things weren't happening with one song, we'd move on to another song and come back to it or something. So yeah, it's the best way I can describe it.
How long were you with Dre?
From the very early sessions to, where I was working consistently with him, probably was about 11 years, something like that. It was just soon after he had started Aftermath Records. And there was one record he put out prior to me coming on board. It's called Aftermath Presents. And then just after that record came out was when I came on board. And that was probably like late 96. And then, and then I basically, was kind of working with him almost, to the tail end of 2007, almost 2008, sort of consistently. And then after that, it was more sporadic sessions here or there. But by that point, I was getting asked to work on, records as a producer and as a writer. I was, trying to figure out my own footing, and Dre was very cool about that transition as well.
Boy, that's a good long time to work with somebody.
It was a pretty amazing time. Yeah, it's not all, it doesn't happen like that, especially these days. But it was just one of those, scenarios, a cliche, just right person, right time. And I definitely tried to have that mentality of like, okay, how can I impress Dre today? And I really just tried to show up and bring new techniques and bring new sounds and, anything that when soft synths were starting to break, bringing that to the table and figuring out ways to just keep things fresh in the studio. And I think, without us ever having that discussion, I think he appreciated that I was constantly bringing new things to the table, and, managed to keep that gig for as long as I did. I mean, super grateful. And it was a lot of fun records that I got to be a part of.
What was your first production after Dre, or the first thing that you were asked to produce after your experience with Dre?
Yeah, I mean, while I was still working with Dre, I had done a couple of songs here or there for like Nelly Furtado that I co-written and produced, and then Macy Gray had done a couple of things. It was very scattered, one or two songs here or there, but I'd say one of the biggest, records that I was asked to produce was Fiona Apple, Extraordinary Machine. That was a big sort of, as far as I think most other people outside sort of saw it as a left turn, doing all this hip hop stuff and then doing a record with such an amazing eclectic artist like Fiona was a bit of a, I think surprised a couple of people. Obviously, she could work with whoever, and for her to choose this kind of up and coming guy, whatever, just sort of worked out. And so I'd say that was the first, substantial record that as far as the amount of music that I'd produced for an artist on a single record.
Boy, that is a left turn. That's for sure. But actually, that's cool because you have an eclectic background, so it makes perfect sense. I mean, if people only knew you, if they only knew you from your work with Dre, then they go, "Wow, that blows my mind." But if they knew you as Mike Elizondo, the bass player, then it's kind of a different outlook, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I just, for me, having Dre as a, I had that as a safety zone or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I didn't have to go out and hustle, whatever gig. It was more like, okay, I was in a very fortunate position that I could be very choosy about the things and the project I worked on because I knew I had Dre as sort of like my main gig. But Fiona kind of happening was it's just an amazing opportunity. And I just thought, okay, well, here's an incredible artist. I'm sure I could learn a lot about the process of producing a record on my own. And she was incredible and had a lot of amazing material. And she liked the perspective that I was bringing to her music, and it just worked out, and I think there were a handful of, friends of mine or people that knew me as a musician that might not have seen it as a stretch, but the majority of the people in terms of A&R or managers or other artists probably only knew me as the guy who they seen on all these Dr. Dre productions. So, and it was an incredible thing. I think it was a huge catalyst and in me getting work with the type of and the caliber of artists that I've gotten to work with since then. Fiona Apple is just so revered and respected, rightly so, and it just sort of like totally gave me an entire, broad playing field, or as far as people, being interested in meeting with me or having me produce something that they were working on.
So what did you learn?
Well, I said I would say it was on all ends. I mean, there's the business side of things, which, I had never been asked to put together a budget for an album, and the conversations with management and, and the conversations with the label and back and forth and all that kind of stuff was a huge learning experience. Again, with Dre, that was always taken care of. All I had to do was show up and worry about the creative aspect. But, so that was a big learning experience, but also the, just in terms of listening to an artist and listening to what they want to achieve and trying to figure out ways to accomplish that, being honest and bringing ideas to the table. It's sometimes things that you feel might not be something that the artist wants to hear, but just, feeling like, okay, well, if they trust you, they're going to listen to what you have to say. I mean, all those types of things. I mean, I'm just grateful it was Fiona. I mean, she was incredible. And I think our collaboration, I learned a lot of these lessons probably without her even realizing it. It was just, I had a job to do and I had to figure it out as I went. But, beyond just the experience of hiring the right musicians and making sure that you stay on schedule and all those logistical things. But, it was just an incredible opportunity to take someone's, piece of music just that she had written on a piano and only kind of had, just wanting to see how far we can stretch these piano vocal ideas and just sort of arrangements and beats and sonically and all of the above, man. I mean, it was just an incredible experience, and I'm proud of what we did together.
Yeah, for sure. That was awesome. But I think all of your stuff is awesome because you do bring a different sensibility to it. And I can feel you as a musician, and I can feel you as a bass player. And I think that makes a big difference. Guitar players...
thank you. It's a huge compliment. Thank you.
Really think about it, though. Guitar players and keyboard players approach production from a different standpoint than a bass player. A bass player, because you're playing in the rhythm section, the power of bass, you have a different outlook on things, and I can feel that. I can feel that you have that's not a concentration, but you're really aware of that.
Oh, that's a big compliment. Thank you, man. I mean, I think there are, I was just a part of this panel actually recently with Larry Klein and Justin Meldo Johnson, and who are both very good friends of mine, and proud to be in that club of it's sort of a thing that's been going on for a little while now, where you see bass players sort of transition into producers. And I think there is a certain sensibility, not that we're all the same, but I think there is a certain sensibility that bass players bring to the playing environment that translates to being someone who is capable of being a producer. So whatever that is, I'm grateful. I think a lot of people. I'm also a big believer that your personalities and your interests, guide you to whatever instrument you're going to play, whether that's drums or being a lead singer or playing piano and keyboards, guitar and bass. And I definitely feel that there's a certain temperament for most bass players, that wind up, working well as producers. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, less volatile. It's not like lead singers don't do well in that position.
We're responsible for. Yeah, mostly not. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it is a selfless. You do have to sort of take a selfless approach to most things, and it's for me. It truly is. I'm not just saying this. It is amazing that when you just get to be a part of helping someone else realize like their true potential, and and to come out of an experience and just so excited and then have success, from that. It's such a rewarding thing. And, and you feel grateful that you get to be a part of like helping other people really fulfill what it is that they have inside. So it's pretty gratifying in that way.
Mike, what's the toughest part of a production project for you?
I mean, I think, there's times where I think it's like once you're getting close to the end and the artist and you might be totally aligned, but then there's also the label and then depending on the manager's role, there's a lot of times the manager can kind of come in and there's, and obviously they all have a say in the artist. And it's just making sure, I think, that we're all on the same page, that the manager's pushing the artist in the right way to get the best out of what they feel. And the A&R is doing that. And, you sort of have to juggle between those entities. Ultimately, the artist, should have a pretty self-aware, view of what they want from whatever we're working on. But you got to take in some of the influence of the A&R and label and managers, and making sure that we all get to the finish line with the same goals and the same vision, and that everyone's excited. Because there's some times where you and the artist might be totally aligned, and then you get to the finish line, and you come to find out that the label is not, doesn't agree with certain choices or doesn't feel that it's right, and then you got to kind of have to figure out, all right, how do you make sense of what they're trying? And sometimes, they might be able to convey it in a way that's very, easy to understand, but then there's other times where they might not have a background that enables them to communicate it in an easy to understand way. So you kind of have to figure out their code and what they're feeling and what they're hearing and apply that to whatever you're working on. Make sure that if you feel that it does add, that, you achieve that, but if you feel like it's not working, you got to convey that too. And, it's just it's that last little bit of just getting everybody at the finish line at the same time sometimes can be a little tricky, but, it's part of the job.
How much pre-production do you do?
Well, these days I've been doing, it kind of goes hand in hand. I've been doing mostly I'd say co-writes that lead to productions. And so within that co-write, just by the nature of just, putting up a demo, I mean, and most of my co-writes happen at my studio. We wind up getting, at the very least, maybe 50% there, and kind of have a blueprint of what that song could be, once we kind of finish it out. So, I mean, that's typically it. For bands where I'm not co-writing or artists where I'm not co-writing, I'm definitely very much involved in terms of just the song selection, and sometimes even as early as while they're writing, them sending me demos. That usually happens with an artist while, they're somebody that I've already worked with. But even, some bands that are coming to the table going, hey, we've got all these demos, what do you think, which one should we finish, and so even if I'm not a part of the writing, I'm trying to, chime in the early stages of just what songs are worth finishing. And then, from there, it just depends on the type of record we're making. Some might be pretty heavily involved with programming. Some are just, just maybe spending time rehearsing. I mean, I just did a record with a band where I did no programming. I actually, we actually recorded everything live, including lead vocals, and did it without a click and recorded everything to tape. And it was a lot of fun. And that required more pre-production in terms of rehearsals and getting, me to the rehearsal spot or them coming to the studio to rehearse for a week. And we'd work out the arrangements there and kind of do the prep work there, more old school type of pre-production. But, just depends. Every artist is a little bit different, and some like to know the blueprint before we officially start making the record. So I'm just trying to cater it to each artist.
When I was looking at your credits, I noticed that there's a lot of singles that you've done. Alanis and Carrie Underwood, Maroon 5.
Yeah.
Is that a result of writing? You've written something and it seems like it works for that particular artist?
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of times it's writing with the actual artist. And And I think this day and age, I mean, most records are I mean, depending on the artist, I mean, someone like Carrie Underwood probably writes, somewhere close to, I don't know, 100 songs if I'm being, modest. I mean, she probably writes more than that herself. And then with her producer and her A&R, they go through probably another 300 songs that have been submitted, and there's just a lot of material being thrown in, to every record that gets made. And so if there's a song that I've co-written, sometimes I produce, I like to produce the things that I've co-written, but sometimes there's already a producer who's been asked to produce the whole record, and those songs go on to be produced by someone else. But I'd say more recently it has been that where if I'm not producing a full record from beginning to end, which is more rare, I'd say it's not as often as it might have been, at one point. It's more do 2 songs here or 4 songs there, whatever. And I just try and just start usually as a co-writer, and then that if the song makes the cut, then I'll go in and produce that, and sometimes add in a couple of extra songs that maybe they wrote on their own just to kind of, fill out our time. But I'd say it's definitely a result of co-writes, but it just depends. I mean, the 21 Pilots, I co-wrote one song, but the bulk of the things that I worked on with them were songs that they had written themselves, that Tyler had written himself, and and we just sort of had the discussions of like what songs, depending on the time frame, they were in and out of town, so sometimes it's just more of a logistical thing where an artist who doesn't live in Los Angeles is only going to be here for a certain amount of time, and so we can maybe get 2 songs done, and then they come back and we get another 2 songs done, just sort of figure it out like that.
Do you play often on your productions?
Yeah, I mean, again, if it's a band, I'm probably not doing much playing. If it's a solo artist, I'm doing a good amount of playing, anything from bass and guitar to keyboards and programming, a little bit of everything. And then there's times where I love, obviously, if it's a solo artist, I love being able to bring in musicians, of a high caliber to kind of add another flavor. I'm not one of those guys that has to play every instrument. If I have an idea and a vision for it, I'll jump on it. But I'm always a fan of just bringing in other musicians to come in and add life and bring their perspective to the music as well, and just sort of be there to sort of have a final say on what gets used. But that's also something that I have a lot of fun doing. So it just depends on the artist, and who I'm working with.
If you're recording basic tracks that you're playing on, for instance, do you have trouble with producing and playing at the same time, in that you have to use 2 parts of your brain, to do it? Or does it just come easy to you?
Yeah, I mean, I try and, it usually starts with an idea, and then while I'm performing it, I'm just thinking about trying to play it to the best of my ability. And then as soon as I'm done playing, I kind of come back and put on more of the producer hat and just try and be honest with whether I think it works or sounds good, or whether someone else would be better off playing it. So there's times where I'll go and put the idea down and go, yeah, that works well, or man, that wasn't the right way, or I think that's going to work, but I need to get someone who can really play it better, and decide from there. But I feel like I try to be try not to be precious about anything. If I'm playing it, I just try and be in the moment and play it. If it's a keyboard thing, if it's programming, whatever, and just try and take it as far as I can. And sometimes that's good, and that's exactly what's needed. And other times I need to bring in another person to come in, another musician or whatnot to help take it to a higher level. But I don't seem to have much problem kind of going back and forth. It sort of feels like a seamless part of the process for me.
Yeah, some people have a problem switching mindsets real fast. They can only stay in one. Well, I'm sort of that way myself, where I can't produce and engineer at the same time with basics anyway. I mean, I've done it and I can, but I don't think I do it as well.
Yeah.
You just do one thing or another better.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's, amazing people like Eric Valentine or Bill Bottrell, or, I know that there's many others, but there's, a handful of those guys that literally, you look at Bill Bottrell, who can play every instrument, literally, master at any instrument, can engineer and can produce and write the song. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
to me, that's a lot of hats, and he can do it all. I've had the pleasure of getting to work with him and watch him do it. And he's just, it's a seamless, just kind of, ebb and flow of just him kind of picking up an instrument, going, deciding what's going to work and what's not. For me, it's more on the musician and producer side. I wouldn't consider myself an engineer. There were times in the early days, just out of necessity, where I would place the mic and trial by, error, but I always have an engineer in the room with me to handle the more technical side of capturing things, but we'll have definitely have a strong opinion on what I think it should sound like. But in terms of the actual setup and, things of that nature, I always make sure I have an engineer in the room. But as far as playing a part or that kind of thing, I don't know. I've always pretty much just had a pretty, try to have a selfless nature in terms of like whether I think it's good or not. And then I'll also take the opinion of the artists who's there. Most of the artists I work with will have a strong opinion on whether something sounds right or not. And, if I'm playing something, I'll bounce it off of them or bounce it off the engineer who might be tracking me as well, So
Mm-hmm.
Try to just have some people in the room that you trust as well.
It's teamwork, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It definitely takes a little village, And I'm grateful. I've had a pretty amazing team for the last, I don't know, most of the guys have been, there for 10 to 15 years. So it's nice when you have people that you develop that unspoken language, and it keeps things, very efficient as well as creative. So
Yeah.
I enjoy that as well.
Very cool. Do you have any techniques for working with the vocalist for like getting the best performance?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously such a crucial part of the record. Probably the most important part. Once you've got a song, it's just I try and just make sure that obviously I know the singer, I know what makes them tick, and making sure that I kind of spread things out. If I'm doing a whole record, I don't like to like just backlog all the vocals at the end. I try and make sure that it's paced out, comfortable. Spread out kind of comfortably for them. And then also to try and figure out what time of day they like to sing. Some singers like to come in for first thing, get their warm up for an hour and knock it out. Some people like to sing later at night and whatever, it's just really trying to figure out each singer, how they feel the most comfortable and gain their trust. So that way they know that I'm going to, try and get the best out of them. And having worked with such great singers like, not only Fiona and Regina Spektor, but even, some of the, Tyler Joseph is, an amazing singer, as well as, some of the other, more heavier rock bands that I've gotten to work with who, they each have their own approach. Some are super, almost sort of athletic about their warm-ups and the time of day they do it and what they warm up doing. And other people are a little bit more like, yeah, I feel like doing a vocal now. And, you just kind of have to take their lead. But once the singer's behind the mic, it's just a matter of being honest, with them. And I have a pretty incredible story that won't sound believable, but I promise you it is believable. But the short story is that I had an opportunity while I was working with Dre to collaborate with Bono, and towards the end of the few days of writing and jamming with Bono and Dre, which is just mind-blowing in and of itself, Bono had asked to cut vocals, and Dre wasn't available. And so Bono had brought up the idea of me cutting his vocals, which up until that point I had never cut a vocal for Dre or done anything like that. And so I think Dre was slightly surprised by it, but was also like, yeah, sure, So the very next day I show up, and Bono got there an hour before we said we were going to get there, and he got there to warm up. And I walk in, and, I kind of just, I'm kind of nervous, obviously, as you can imagine. And Bono's in there, and he's on the mic, and he's like, Mike, he goes, look, he goes, just tell me when it's good and tell me when I could do better. And that just kind of made me realize, like, yeah, he's a singer, he's looking for guidance. And as long as he comes back out of that booth and comes into the studio and feels that he sounds good, then I know I'm doing a good job. Yeah, it was definitely one of those things where I just had to, just forget it was Bono. and that just taught me a big lesson that, no matter how big, how successful, how, a brand new artist recording vocals for the first time, you got to just be honest with them and make sure that you're getting the absolute best and putting them it's sort of like, the best coaches, I'm a big NBA fan, big Lakers fan, and best coaches put their players in a position to succeed. And I try and do that with any singer or musician that I work with, but especially with the vocalist, because it can be a vulnerable experience for any singer. And just try and help them, do their absolute best on that day. And, it's an important part of the process for sure.
Yeah, gee, they're under a microscope, the worst kind of microscope. So yeah, I could see why any singer would feel pretty vulnerable doing that. That's cool. That's good. That's a good story.
Exactly.
I have a buddy who.
Yeah. So that was.
Yeah, I have a friend. U2 uses his studio out in Malibu a lot, and.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Richard Gibbs.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a. Oh yeah, right.
Yeah,
I've heard that name for sure.
It's the Woodshed. It's a fabulous place. It's really, really great. But they like it a lot, and he always tells me the story of Bono coming up to the house. There's a house behind the studio. It's in a barn, and coming up and asking for he and his wife to come down and give him feedback on his last vocal and the whole thing, and they both being terrified what to say, but then understanding that he's really open and the whole band is open to any kind of input and any kind of comments. They're not defensive at all about it, which you've experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true, man. He's a pretty unique, obviously, to have a career as long as they have. I mean, you gotta have a certain work ethic, but it was pretty amazing getting to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Last question, Mike. What's the best piece of business advice, music business advice, that you've received or maybe learned along the way? Did somebody impart like a big aha moment to you as you're going along? Any of that ever happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but I can elaborate a little bit. It's just to just choose wisely what you do with your time. There's been periods of my life where I was, felt like I was just kind of like looking and searching for certain things and doing all these things that maybe, a handful of, maybe I didn't truly love, but I was doing it because it was a gig. And I just realized that all those things that I chased, all that time that I spent chasing things just for a paycheck or just, obviously you got to survive and you got to do, but the sooner you can get to that point where you're doing things that you truly love and you truly feel like, that you're honest with yourself, that this is what you're supposed to be doing. I think that's when you start to have your most success in terms of, just feeling gratified and as well as, creatively as well as, monetarily. I feel like that's when when things really start to happen and when you're in a creative situation where you're truly inspired by the people that you're working with, and you're not just doing something because, it's a gig or it's a paycheck or this might be a big hit, but musically it has nothing to do with anything that you enjoy. I've just learned to try and eliminate that and just be honest with myself about what I truly think is great and not waste my time doing things that I feel aren't great or aren't going to help me be great. I think that's when you start to have more consistency and just to make sure that it's something that you truly love being a part of. Otherwise, it's never really going to fulfill you, and you're never gonna. If you're not fulfilled creatively, then your work is only gonna go so far. And I think that's those are lessons that I've learned from, I'd say, pretty much every great that I've gotten to work with, from Dre to, Ry Cooder, T-Bone Burnett, Glenn Ballard. I mean, a lot of amazing producers in various, genres. I just saw, whether they were a producer or whether they were a musician or a writer, it's just I felt like once they eliminated all the excess stuff, that's when they truly had their most success.
Wow. Good words here. That's a good description of following your heart, I would say. Following your heart, and everything else will follow. That's great. Were you
absolutely? And I can definitely
go ahead.
I can definitely vouch for that as being something that's worked.
Were you ever fooled with the project where you thought it maybe wasn't as good as you might have thought, or it didn't come out as well, and then it went on to become a big hit, or at least something that was critically acclaimed?
I mean, I think that there's times you just don't know. I mean, there's times where you get a hunch whether something's going to be big or not. I would say that there's been something where I thought, oh man, this is going to bomb, or this is going to fail miserably, and it went on to be something huge. But I just sort of I try and look, if there is something that feels like it could be successful, and you just want to make sure, like Lenny Waronker always tells me, is don't mess it up, don't screw it up.
Yeah, right.
Let it be the great thing that it is, and just try and help it along. But there's times where things have exceeded what, how popular I thought it was going to be. I mean, I remember working early days with Eminem, never expected that to be as huge as he went on to become, especially in the early days. But you just never know. I've given, if we can predict when something's going to be a hit, I mean, there'd be, tons of gazillionaire, songwriter, producer people, it's just, you kind of go with what you feel is right. And then the people decide ultimately, but there's always surprises, but nothing where I thought it was destined for, the bargain bin and it ended up being a big success.
Was there something that you knew while you were working on it, this is going to be huge, and it turned out that way?
I mean, I thought, there definitely, while we're working on some of the Dre stuff, I mean, Eminem's The Real Slim Shady, 50 Cent's In the Club, even leading to like more recent, Stressed Out from 21 Pilots, felt like it was something special and unique. But with Stressed Out, I didn't know for sure, just because it didn't really sound like anything else on radio. But sometimes that's a good thing, and in their situation, it ended up obviously being a good thing, that it didn't sound like anyone else. But there's times where you're in the room and you just feel like, oh man, if all the things line up, this could be really cool.
Very cool. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, please send them to questions@bobbyoinnercircle.com. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to bobbyowsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or you can go to bobbyowinnercircle.com or find it in iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, and Google Play. At bobbyowsinski.com and bobbyowinnercircle.com, you'll also find a sign-in form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.